Hey, deserving listeners, Vanderpump Rules. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. If you are a cast member of this show or any of the other shows that I watch, keep in mind that everything that I say is speculative, and feel free to email me or talk with me on the phone to clarify or set me straight, because I am curious. Let's watch.
I was.
Why?
Because she didn't want to take accountability?
I'm so ashamed and embarrassed that I'm even capable of keeping the secret from somebody who has been in my corner since the beginning. Ariana, I'm so sorry for betraying you.
Yeah, Ariana could say in this moment and forever, I don't forgive you, I don't believe you. Ariana could say that. But if someone commits a transgression like this that she committed in Tom, this is what you should be saying and feeling, because it's just, it is right, it is healthy. We haven't seen that from Tom at all. Maybe behind the scenes he's like this, probably not. And Raquel has said and done a lot of things post being discovered that are in this camp. Does it let her off the hook? It's up to Ariana. It's not up to us and everyone else involved, because I think her and Tom have transgressed upon everyone, because they put Swartz in a real difficult situation, dragged him down with them to some extent, and for everyone else being deceived and being lied to, this sort of thing. So, there's a lot of transgression, but the key to recovery and the key to health for Raquel, if Raquel is going to reckon with what she has done and learn so that she won't do it again, acknowledging the harm is the key. And Raquel, if you believe her, which I do, I can't know, and I'm always holding out for a possibility that my impression is not accurate, because that's just good science and that's just good clinical work, but it looks genuine. What do you think? But if it is, then that's the key. Now, like I said, Ariana doesn't have to forgive her. Can't imagine Ariana will in this moment. But if forgiveness or acceptance of an apology or repair or some kind of growth is going to happen from this, it begins with, in her heart, feeling the shame, feeling the hurt that she committed on other people. And often the first reaction to that, when you're in Raquel's shoes, once the denial is forced away from you, is confusion, which is what she is exhibiting. How could I have done that? And then begins the self-discovery, and hopefully a lot of therapy, discover why she did it. Because if one has empathy, which I have no reason to believe Tom and Raquel don't have empathy, just normal levels of care for other people, then how could you do such a thing? How could you have, for 8 months or something along those lines, taken thousands of actions that were obviously harmful when there were so many other options available to each one of them? That's a very interesting question, right? And there's a lot of possible self-discoveries, but once discovered, then you know what to account for so that you don't do this again, right?
I can't even fathom the pain that I've caused you. I have been completely selfish, and you're right, selfish is not the right word, because it doesn't even begin to describe the state of mind I have been.
That's good too, because I think selfish is a good enough word. There's a lot of words that can be added to that. But when Ariana was upset and saying, selfish? No, demonic, subhuman. And Raquel is acknowledging that and not pushing back on that, and even saying, you're right, selfish doesn't summarize. It's not the best word. So it seems like, at the very least, no one's screaming at Raquel in this moment. So maybe this is the beginning of repair. And what do I mean by repair? Well, in one version, it's this, happy-go-lucky world where Ariana and Raquel are able to repair many more conversations, a lot of anger. Maybe eventually Raquel figures out what factors, not excuses, but factors of, I grew up with a lot of restrictions and I pushed back on any restriction, even if it was internal. And because of the traumas I went through as a young person, it's not an excuse, but I basically had this black and white point of view about any restrictions, that it was unfair to me. But I'm now learning that some restrictions are actually a good idea because you don't want to harm other people. Also, I was just in denial. I just figured Tom would eventually do the right thing, and it's so stupid that I waited so long. But whatever it is, whatever factors led up to it, that she can learn and express, because that'll help for Ariana to hear that, instead of just believing that humans that are close to her, Ariana, are malicious and callous and lacking of all empathy and just waking up in the morning wanting to harm her, because I don't think that's true, and that's not a helpful narrative for Ariana to land on. And so it might look like that, and then eventually, I guess in a happy-go-lucky world, they're friends again, maybe even deeper friends. That can happen. That can happen. There's obviously other versions where they just agree to disagree and go their separate ways, and Ariana, even though she accepts the apology, is like, well, I still hate you, and I don't want to be friends with you, but I appreciate the apology, and I never want to see you for the rest of my life. There's a lot of different options, and I think everyone involved deserves to go down that road, and maybe this is the beginning.
It was a mistake. The way it was handled was a complete mistake. The way that we have betrayed the people closest to us was detrimental to all of our friendships. And I'm seeing all of the consequences for my actions that I never even considered because I was living in the moment.
Okay, living in the moment. I wonder what discovery she'll discover or what set of discovery she'll discover if and when she engages in exploration, because I wonder if she'll be like, well, I wasn't really living in the moment, it was something else. But if it is that, then that is in line with my running hypothesis that she has a philosophy or a personality, and maybe it doesn't come from trauma. You can find a lot of people who are free spirits who don't like to think about consequences because they don't want to be hindered in that way. Not that they're psychopaths, but that in general, they act first and think later. And sometimes that's a wonderful thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. This doesn't really fit because it's months of acting. You would think that if at some point in there, you would think, the kinds of things that I'm thinking about that would be valid is someone says, hey, do you want to skydive tomorrow? And you're just like, yeah. And you don't really think about the consequences. You take that action, and it benefits you because you don't overthink things. But with something that goes on for months, there's a lot of opportunity to be like, well, wait. But it does fit in line with my rough hypothesis that she either comes from trauma of over-restriction or, again, just as a personality of being a free spirit, and that pendulum has swung too far to freedom and too far away from thinking about consequences and being responsible and thinking about the future. So it is in line with that. I can't imagine that this is going over that well, but everyone's not yelling at her, so maybe this is helpful. Tom is silently nodding his head, but we seemingly agreeing with what she's saying, with I think maybe saying, yeah, me too, but he hasn't indicated anything along the lines of what Raquel is saying right now.
Why'd you do it?
I did it because Tom and I had this connection. I felt seen and heard by him, and I haven't
Not by me? Didn't feel seen or heard by me?
No, actually, well, if I'm going to be completely
I've
honest,
been there for you since James was being mean to you. And you.
Okay, well, I think Raquel's about to say, if I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't feel as seen by you. She said earlier she appreciated Ariana's help and maybe mentorship or something, support. But regardless of, even if Ariana was very nice and did see Raquel, it's a different sort of seeing when it's romantic, right? It can be, it's not always. But for some of us, we might have very close friendships, but it's different when it's romantic and sexual and private and physical in that way, right? Not always, of course. So that's the way I interpret it, is that this is in line with what Raquel was saying in the last episode of the season, where she's like, I just wanted to see what it was like to have sex with someone that I loved. And so, I don't know, does anyone know Raquel's history? Because We do know that she was engaged to James, right? And that seemingly was brief, that relationship, I don't know. But what's going on there with her? If I didn't know Raquel's age, I would think that she was a teenager, the way she talks. Just this lack of experience and longing for, well, I guess, regardless of age, there's a lot of people that lack connection. And when we don't have that, even if we have a lot of people in our life, which Raquel seemingly has, the loneliness, And I want to emphasize this for yourself, to evaluate for yourself, because there's a lot of loneliness that goes unnoticed. There's a normalization of loneliness in today's society that is very detrimental and harmful, not only just socially, but physically. There are measurable physical symptoms and increases of rates of certain things because of loneliness, because of stress, because of lack of connection, because of lack of attachment. And obviously a lot of mental conditions that are increasing, stress-related conditions, depression, anxiety, social anxiety, suicidality. Those are all on the increase. And the hypothesis is that there's an increase in loneliness, an increase in disconnection, an increase in lack of being around other humans. The pandemic didn't help, obviously. So I emphasize that might be one of the main factors for Raquel, and that led to her ignoring impulses of don't hurt other people, right? When we're desperate for something, we will push aside or go into denial or make justifications or say, I'll deal with it tomorrow, when we're so needy for something and we're finally getting it, or it seems like we might be able to get it. And a lot of the viewership of these shows seemingly have this notion that, well, they have it all. They're famous, they're rich, they're beautiful, they look great in an outfit, and they have a million followers on Instagram. They have it all, and their life is better than mine, and they couldn't possibly be lonely, and if they are, it's their fault or something. And there is nothing about their life on this show that would mean that they would get those needs met. There's perhaps even barriers of being on a show like this, meaning that it isn't necessarily conducive to connection and getting your needs met in those ways. So I don't know these individuals, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of true loneliness. So for Ariana and Raquel to be close and being emotional together, being supportive, it's still possible that there wasn't really a deep connection, that they weren't really safe, and the relationship wasn't very long. I suspect the relationship wasn't very long. And that's another thing that I think people will believe in today's society, in the United States particularly. It's so mobile, right? It's like you move here to get a job, you go here to go to college. It's a world stage, world community. Everyone is available over text around the world. But we evolved, we understand, with 50 to 100 people literally within eye and earshot of us for our entire lives. That's our natural state. And the more we move away from that, seemingly, is detrimental to our health and our mental health and our happiness, and causes us to go down roads that are really destructive for everyone. So my point is that you can have a lot of people in your life, and you can have even some contact with a lot of people, but we evolved to, in today's milieu, would be living with people. Like, I guess the ideal world that would be configured in contemporary suburban America would be that you would live with 15 people that you loved and you had been living with for decades, and everyone on your street you saw every day for at least half the day, even if it was just hanging out together, not hanging out, but doing things together, like you're both mowing the lawn together, or you're both doing your taxes in the same room, but you're not interacting much. We evolved to be around other people, and it makes us feel safe. It makes us feel connected. It gives us meaning. Obviously, there's support that happens, and emotional support and practical support. And how weird would that be for us to have that? It would be called a cult or something, like, oh my God, 15 people in one house, and they hang out. It'd be like this weird, gross, incestuous, compound, culty, disgusting thing. And that's part of the problem, right? That we stigmatize. Like whenever I bring up the idea of getting to know one's neighbors, because I try. I whenever I move, me and my wife, we move, I always put a lot of effort into trying to get to know the neighbors because I value this. And also, I just come from a time in the 70s in the neighborhood I was in where everyone knew each other because, again, there's no internet, there was barely anything on TV. And so you were just outside and you just saw people and you hung out, right? So that's the way I like to do things. Plus, practically, you get into conflicts with people in your neighborhood sometimes the people right next door. And if you have no relationship with that person, then things will fly out of control very quickly because all you have is hatred for that person. Whereas if you have some semblance of a relationship, then when the conflict arises, you have some trust and some ability to have a conversation. Not always, but anyway. So when I bring this up to people, I'm like, hey, do you know the people in your neighborhood? Or the ideal world is where y'all are sharing things on your street. And particularly from Americans, I'll get this attitude of just like, well, I don't want to know my neighbors. I don't want them in my business. There's this attitude, it's stigmatized, getting to know people, right? Like if you had a neighbor that came over to your house every once in a while and just knocked on your door and said like, hey, can I borrow something? Or, hey, we're having a street get together. And I know some of you value community and neighbors, but there are people who don't. They think it's gross or invasive or incestuous or annoying or lack of boundaries, this sort of thing. And of course, there are situations where that would be accurate and justified. But I'm really sad for Americans and other societies that are like this. And it's not heading in the right direction is the thing. It's only going to get worse. I can't imagine the amount of loneliness and the symptoms of loneliness and the mentality of loneliness that will exist in 20, 30, 40 years. It terrifies me.
Personal things where I felt more compelled to confide in Tom about those things.
Inappropriate. Never should have ever crossed that line.
As
That's
a
disgusting.
Friend, my whole, because I've been a people pleaser my whole life, and I dropped that mentality and I started only pleasing myself.
Yeah, okay, Ariana is going to say that doesn't justify it, and hopefully Raquel, she's doing a pretty good job, and she could quickly follow us up. Look, this doesn't justify it. You're right to be angry at me. I'm just telling you why I was clouded and why I was so desperate. I think Raquel's doing a little bit of a good job of emphasizing, look, I was struggling. It doesn't justify it, but I was in a bad place, right? And that often is where transgressions come from, and often where infidelity comes from. In fact, in my clinical experience, it's always where infidelity comes from, is from a struggle. It doesn't justify it, but it's a context that can be a part of an apology, a deep apology of remorse. When we are struggling, whenever people are online and they're ridiculing a Karen or something, what I see is someone, the Karen, they are struggling. They're exhibiting anger and they're not doing a good thing, right? They're transgressing seemingly. But in my experience, 100% of the time, that person is deeply suffering. Doesn't justify it, but does provide a backdrop. People typically don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to annoy every employee and ask for the manager and just fly off the handle and yell and scream and be unfair. People don't typically do that. Some people do. But even psychopaths don't do that because they have some sense not to sabotage their life that badly. When it's this terrible, tragic paradox where the more trauma you've been through, the more relational trauma, the more abuse trauma that you've been through, the more stresses you have in your life, health, economic, relationship, racism, sexism, and so on, the more pain you're experiencing, the more hurt you're feeling, the more you understandably are struggling, the less likely you are to feel safe enough to exhibit that hurt. And so it builds up. And when we are hurt, we tend to get angry about it because it's unfair. Why do I have to deal with this? The person down the street, they seem happy, they're paying their bills. Why can't I pay my bills? my parents are treating me like crap, or my spouse is treating me like crap, or my spouse is, how come people, not everyone has to deal with this. How come I'm the one who just, it's infuriating, right? I'm being treated in racist ways at work. Why? It's natural to get angry. It's unjust. It feels very unjust. You get angry. And so you, as a result, you have a lot of feelings. You feel hurt, you're in pain, but you're also angry. And when things happen to you, then because you're so hurt and because you're so demoralized, you do not trust people with your vulnerability, because in your experience, that's a huge liability, a huge risk that they're just going to capitalize on your vulnerability and harm you more. So, or at the very least, they won't rise to the occasion and take care of you. So what left do you have? You have your anger. That's all you have. And you just let it out. It just overflows, right? So anyway, for Raquel, she is trying to provide this backdrop of, I was a people pleaser my whole life, and I was trying to not do that anymore. And that's exactly in line with, it feels very satisfying when I just take a stab at a guess, and then later on there's like these very firm confirmations of what I was saying. I don't know exactly if this is true, but that is exactly in line with what I was saying in a previous video, where you come from a people-pleasing place and you are trying to not do that anymore, but you have this second phase as you emerge out of that first phase that is still not okay. It's a transition zone to assertiveness and considering other people's feelings, but there's a transition zone of, I'm not going to please anybody. I'm not going to think about anybody's feelings. I always think too much about people's feelings. Now I'm not going to think about anyone's feelings. I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to act on, which you deserve to do, but you need oversight. You need someone to help you, a therapist, if you will, to be that super ego suggester of just like, good. You're pleasing yourself. You're taking your life back. You're not pleasing everyone. And have you thought about what this is going to do? What do we need to add to it without suppressing your new emerging life of trying to please yourself? So let's think very briefly about what your actions might be doing to other people, what consequences there are. And then as a therapist, if I introduce that and the client goes, oh yeah, you're right, I shouldn't, and then they quickly start going back to phase one. No, phase one. You should be selfish. You should be thinking about yourself. And just for a time, think about the consequences of your actions, not to shame yourself or to shut down the whole freedom project, but just as a check-in. Okay. And then you can go back, and once you sign off on this pathway of pleasing yourself, then again, go for it. But we'll check it. So that's why you need oversight. I don't think Raquel had that.
And this was something that I was curious to see.
So my dog had just died. I cried in your fucking arms, and you thought I should go fuck her boyfriend. You are lower than the fucking lowest of low people. You really are.
I know.
You're a fucking psycho.
So, psychopath. Yeah. Again, I get the anger. I do. It's a little interesting, the difference in amount of it. Now, you could argue that they were really yelling at Tom, but Tom would defend himself, and so it would get into this yelling match between each other, and Raquel has a much different approach of, you're right. Now, I'm guessing, or at least I'm hoping, that Raquel doesn't think that she's a psychopath or that she's the lowest of the low. I hope that she's just like, well, she's angry and I deserve her to be angry at me. I'm not going to internalize everything she's saying, but I'm definitely not going to defend myself. That's not going to do any good. So I should take my lumps right now, and hopefully we can start repairing. So, it's... And I wonder if this is saying something about Ariana's personality in general. Maybe y'all know. There's a streak there for... Now, I haven't really hypothesized about Ariana's traumas as well. Of course, she's going through a trauma right now, relational trauma. But there's, when she's really angry, is this some sort of pain for herself? Does she see herself in Raquel? I don't know. Do you have any ideas?
Path. You are terrifying to me as a person. The fact that you are capable of this shit, unfucking believable. You're a dementor. I know you like Harry Potter. You're a fucking dementor. I hope Charlotte fucking haunts you.
I
You're
know I
soul-sucking
am.
individual.
You're completely right.
And I will, after today,
Yeah. Again, I get Ariana's anger. I would just hope that at some point she can hear what Raquel is saying, if she wants to. That she can say, okay, well, at least Raquel is taking responsibility and not being defensive the way Tom is. So maybe I should at least note that.
never see or speak to you again, and I will be better for it.
Why couldn't you stop? Why did you have to keep going?
It was almost impossible to turn away from. And
You were in love.
I'm not a fan of that question. I would have liked to have heard more from Raquel regarding how she sees that. She's saying it's almost impossible to turn away from. I mean, that's the thing for me in my life and my profession, and even in my personal life. There's a lot of time to explore and an ethic, a value of exploration, because even when Raquel is saying the sentences and using English words to describe what's going on, it's just an approximation of what's really happening. You know, the depth of human experience is deep and cannot be put into words easily. And even when it is put into words effectively, everyone has a different association with phrases and words and context. So there's just so many questions I have. But Raquel is, she's saying it was impossible to turn away from, that Andy asked you were in love. I think Raquel's hesitation is saying, well, I don't know if I was in love, because I think for Andy, he's equating like that compulsive feeling that you have for someone. It must be framed as love. And love is subjective, and there's a lot of definitions. But I could see a world in which she would frame it as not necessarily love, but as extremely compelling. And what I'm guessing is that for her, it was meeting a lot of needs that had yet to be met sufficiently for her, maybe even ever met. We heard about the need of freedom, so I'd be curious as to what circumstances she come from where she was never allowed to be free. And then she also talked about how she always wanted to have sex with someone she was in love with. What's going on there? Was that an overwhelming need that had yet to be met in her life? And what's all involved in that need? And what does she mean by love? Or no, it's someone that loves me, I think is what she's saying. I can't remember which direction it was. I guess that kind of matters given this context. But is that a safety thing? Is it a lack of experience thing? I think I hypothesized that earlier with her. It's like she talks like someone who doesn't have a lot of experience dating, which is fine. But if you don't have that experience, you know, like typical teenagers, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. What are those needs that she's talking about that aren't framed as love?
yeah,
You're ugly. You're hideous.
I know.
You're
I have
rotten
been.
on the
I know.
inside. Rotten. Like a fucking moldy piece of fruit. Rotten.
Again, I get the anger, but at some point it's I don't know. I would ask Ariana if I were there, just like, okay, it's been established and she agrees with you. What are you trying to accomplish with this? It might be completely justified, but I'm curious, what's your goal here? And if I had a good enough relationship with Ariana, then she'd be able to answer and trust me and say something like, I don't know what she would say, but I can imagine someone in her shoes saying like, I'm disgusted with her and I want her to know that I'm disgusted with her. And I would say, okay, makes sense. It is normal to have a disgust reaction to that. We evolved an emotion of, it serves a lot of purposes. One of the purposes of disgust is that it helps us to avoid things that will poison us, right? Often we're disgusted with big piles of sewage or the smell of sewage. Well, we seemingly evolved that response because those humans or other mammals that would go towards that or ignore the signals of that, were more likely to, have an infection and die or something. I think that's at least the hypothesis. So that's one benefit of having disgust. Another one is that was seemingly co-opted as our species, the species that we evolved from, became more and more social, is that we have co-opted that physical disgust of poison and of the signals of being, like even the action of of going, ugh, like we go, ugh, that's disgusting. It's because it comes from the effort of trying to expel something out of your mouth or your stomach or something, because that, if we eat something and we feel, I feel disgusted, it's so gross, it's a signal that, well, it might be poison, so get it out of your body. And anyway, so with social interactions, we will have that. Sometimes people will literally vomit in situations like this. They'll just be like, you are disgusting. I can't believe that you did that. And it just makes me want to throw up. Why is that? We could only hypothesize because we can't experiment on humans in this way, and we don't have a time machine to go back and evaluate and observe how we evolved. But one hypothesis that I don't know if I've ever really put out there before, that I might put out there now, is that we benefit by having trusting, stable relationships, right? And when we suddenly discover that that's not the case, we see behavior that doesn't exhibit that, then it benefits us in our survival to have disgust, that emotion provoked in us, so that we get away from it. And I think that's what she's experiencing right now. She is disgusted with Tom. She's disgusted with Raquel because she's seeing behavior that is harmful to her, and it's a motivating force to push her away in the same way that you might run away and go, oh my God, look at all that sewer, I can smell it, get away from it. And it's a similar evolved response, which is normal and healthy. I think under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have to sit in a room for 10 hours hearing them talk and looking at their faces. So I think it's bringing out a particular I'm guessing that Ariana, on a typical day, not being around Tom or Raquel, that she, has ups and downs and emotionally, but maybe not this amount of disgust and anger. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Let's do a little guided self-affirmation if you want. I will say a number of phrases off the top of my head in a particular category based on my own mood or intuition of what the show might be provoking for people. I think a theme on this show during this reunion in particular, given a lot of the hurt, is that people are getting rigid and angry. And I think that's a result of feeling discounted and unheard and feeling not validated. So we can look to ourselves, and because I'm guessing this show might trigger that for you, this feeling of not being heard, not being validated. And we can tell ourselves, really two different parallels here. One is focus on the self for a second and just say to ourselves that I deserve to be validated. I deserve to be heard. You can say it in your mind or say it with me or pause it and explore these ideas with some thoughts. Maybe self-journal, that's a weird, write in a journal about yourself or have a conversation. Some of you are couples watching, which I always commend. Shows that you really care about your relationship, in my mind anyway. So you can talk about validation and what do you want validation for? That's a good thing. What's one thing that you would want validation for? And one of the things that I find for a lot of people is that they give up on hope on ever receiving that validation. I'll hear things from clients, people saying, well, my husband or my parents or my friends, they're not really good at validation. So, what's the point? And maybe so, but that shouldn't be the end of the line for you. We all deserve validation. And sometimes people will surprise you. I've worked with parents that were deemed as rigid and unchangeable, and they would change. People are absolutely capable of change, particularly when you give them an easy road to change. Often it takes a family therapist to help guide that. People resist change because of fear. And if you can get rid of that fear and show them that there's nothing to be afraid of, in fact, there's even less fear when you change to this other way, then people will take it. They want to. They want to love. They want to give. They want to receive. So that's one thing. I deserve to be validated. So what is it that you want to be validated for? Maybe it's something big. Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's, I want to be validated for doing the dishes. I want to be validated for working hard all day long. I want to be validated for my parenting skills, or I want my parents to say that they're proud of me. I want my partner to say that they're proud of me. I want my partner to tell me that they think I'm talented at this or that. I want the internet to validate me in this way. I want my parents to recognize that I have done a lot for them. I want my kids to appreciate the amount of work I put into taking care of them and loving them. I want the world to validate that I exist, that I matter, that I am not worthless, like the way that I sometimes think that I am. Whatever it is, focus on that and tell yourself, I deserve to be validated. I deserve to be recognized. I deserve to acknowledge. I deserve acknowledgement. I deserve people to be proud of me. So that's one parallel. The other parallel is, what validation might we give other people? And this is the other question to contemplate. What, just pick someone close to you, whether it's the closest person to you or maybe someone a little further away from you, and imagine if there was something that they want validation for, what would that be? And to write it down or make note of it. And you don't have to act on it, of course, but the road to validation, the road to mutual validation, the road to love, the road to meaning, the road to happiness begins with acknowledgement, and to at the very least acknowledge, this is what I want validation for, and this is what I imagine this other person wants validation for. Now, if you literally don't know, then just ask, just ask them. And if they don't answer right away, say like, well, what would be one thing that pops in your head? Just one random thing. There's a lot of ways to ask someone. If you have kids, this is particularly important, right? Some of you are probably already doing this and are good at it, so maybe choose someone else. But what can we be validated for, and what can we validate others for? And when we do that, then we're in a win-win. And sometimes we have to be the ones to change. We have to be the catalyst that pushes our relationships towards the better. If we wait for other people to initiate that sort of thing, we might die waiting. Whereas if you just bite the bullet and say, you know what, I'm going to take the high road, I'm going to be the healthy one, I'm going to be the one who actually makes the first move, and you get the ball rolling, and maybe you're always that person. And then, it sucks. You'd like to have other people initiate. But like I said, if we wait for other people to initiate, or even just reciprocate initiation for the rest of our lives, nothing will ever happen. So, just put your ego aside and say, or acknowledge that maybe you've done a lot more healing than other people. If you watch this channel, I'm going to take a guess that at the very least, on average, you have more openness, more compassion, more love to give. And so sometimes you just have to say that. That's what I do, frankly. I initiate a lot of things in my life. And a long time ago, I got over the barrier of even concerning myself with noting that I was initiating more than other people around me. And I'm happier for it. I have a hard time believing that on my deathbed I'm going to be like, I wish I would have been stubborn and waited for other people to initiate appreciation of me. I'm just going to take a guess and say that I'm not going to have that thought. So, I have a lot. I've been given a lot. My parents are very loving. They just celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary, very stable life. My parents never drank or used drugs or really fought much. They were always home. Throughout my life, I'm 52, and they still love me. They still are proud of me, and they're still, they still say they love me. They still reach out to me, So I've been given a lot, and I can thus give to others. So anyway, I deserve to be validated. Say it. And I deserve to validate others. And take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.